people are turning away from our shores. We're turning them away from our shores. Mr. Speaker, I call upon my colleagues to take up comprehensive immigration reform and pass the Senate bill now. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Colorado reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I thank the Speaker for the recognition. Let me just remind my colleagues here on the floor of the House that we are considering House Resolution 339 that provides for consideration of H.R. 2775, the No Subsidies Without Verification Act of 2013. And despite all of the tactics to distract from that debate, that is what the debate centers on today. I would like to point out to my colleagues an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal from today called Stopping Obamacare Fraud. I'm going to read a little bit of the opinion piece. Every politician claims to hate fraud in government, and the House of Representatives will have a chance to prove it Wednesday when it votes to close a gigantic hole for potential abuse in the Affordable Care Act. The Health and Human Services Department announced in July that it won't verify individual eligibility for the tens of billions in insurance subsidies that the law will dole out. Americans are supposed to receive those subsidies based on income and only if their employer doesn't provide federally approved health benefits. But until 2015, the rule will be, come on in, the subsidy is fine. Continuing to quote from the Wall Street Journal, Health and Human Services will let its applicants self-attest that they are here and that they are legally eligible. No further questions asked. The new Obamacare exchanges will also be taking the applicant's word on their projected household income. It seems that what it calls operational barriers to continue to prevent Health and Human Services from checking applications against Internal Revenue Service income data. The administration argues that the fear of later HHS audits will keep applicants honest, though the threat of such checks has hardly prevented other fraud. The Treasury Inspector General estimates that 21 to 25% of earned income tax credits go to people who in fact are not eligible. An equivalent rate of fraud in the Affordable Care Act could mean $250 billion in bad payments in a decade. And does Health and Human Services really plan to claw back overpayments from individual exchange participants? Continuing to quote from the Wall Street Journal, House Republicans, by contrast, will offer a vote that matters on Tennessee Representative Diane Black's bill to require the administration to have a verification system in place before it hands out subsidies. Democrats have been unusually quiet in their opposition, perhaps because it is hard to justify voting, in effect, to give Americans subsidies to which they have no legal entitlement. Savings for taxpayers aside, the political merit of the House bill is that it puts a spotlight on a major Obamacare failure and makes Democrats vote either to fix it or to simply go along with the failure. It also highlights another case in which the Obama administration is refusing to enforce black-letter law. Republicans are asking that a vast new entitlement be held to the most basic due diligence or be prudently delayed until it can. If Democrats can't support that vote, voters should know. Close quote. Again, from today's Wall Street Journal Review and Outlook. Mr. Speaker, it's pretty apparent that the administration is only enforcing those parts of the law that it finds in its own best interest, and if something is inconvenient or embarrassing, it suspends the enforcement. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, my colleague says we're discussing some bill relating to Affordable Care Act or health care. It's simply not true that this House is working on health care. The Affordable Care Act is being implemented. It wasn't repealed. I know there was a candidate that ran for president against Mr. Obama that wanted to repeal it. Had he been elected, it still would have had to pass these chambers. It didn't happen. Elections happen. The health care reform are being implemented. I just met with some of the folks from the exchanges in my state of Colorado, my office earlier this morning here. I realize the House of Representatives has voted 41 times to repeal Obamacare. It's just talk. The shopping period in the exchanges begins on October 1st. Coloradans, like many across the country, are rolling up their sleeves, going to work, figuring out what the Affordable Care Act means. We even had bipartisan support in my state for our law that created the exchange as well. When Connect for Colorado goes online next month, more than 817,000 Coloradans will have access to choosing a health care insurance product through the exchange, more than 80,000 people in my district. Again, these things are just happening. I mean, this is information I'm sharing here with the public. This has nothing to do. These bills that we're talking about, 40 repeals of Obamacare, this redundant bill here today where they like or don't like what the President's doing. They want to do it themselves. They like what President Obama is doing so much. I mean, these things are nothing. These things aren't going to the Senate. These things aren't being signed. They are absolutely symbolic and a complete waste of time, while this body hasn't spent 1 minute on the floor in consideration of an immigration reform bill. Not 1 minute, which is why I'm taking this time instead of talking about nothing, 41 repeals of Affordable Care Act when it ain't going to happen because elections matter and have consequences. Nothing. Not 1 minute on something big. Securing our border, restoring the rule of law, reducing our deficit, shoring up Social Security, improving our national security, making sure that our system is aligned with our values. These are big deals. Not 1 minute. Not 1 minute. A lot of time on nothing. That's what we're doing today. It's what we did yesterday. I sure hope it's not what we're doing tomorrow, but sadly, I'm not optimistic. We need to act, Mr. Speaker, on so many pressing national issues. Surely we can spare 1 minute or 10 minutes or 15 minutes to discuss and pass the Senate Immigration Reform Bill instead of this nothing going nowhere. Just like yesterday, just like tomorrow. We can do better, Mr. Speaker. This nation deserves an institution in the House of Representatives that serves the people of this country, that serves the people in addressing real issues that they face, people that are tired of the undermining of our law by people working illegally, people that are tired of families being torn apart, people that are tired of 1,000 people a day illegally crossing our southern border. Today, yes, and tomorrow, because of the refusal of this body to allow even 1 minute to discuss or debate a bill on immigration reform. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Colorado reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I would remind everyone in the House chamber that 7 times the House has voted to restrict, delay, defund a portion of the Affordable Care Act. 7 times those have passed into law if it's signed by the President. This is an important effort. This was a massive overtaking of the country's health care system that was passed in not a bipartisan fashion, but a single-party vote, March of 2010. The President has decided now, even with his own law, he got everything he wanted in the law, he's going to selectively enforce. If we're going to talk about the rule of law, let's talk about the rule of law. The bill before us today is a good rule. It assures that those taxpayer subsidies are going to the individuals who are deserving of those subsidies, and they, for crying out loud, let's stop paying the crooks. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Colorado.
Does inquire if the gentleman has any remaining speakers.
The gentleman from Texas has unlimited speakers in himself, but beyond me, no.
Okay, the hordes of people coming to speak on this bill were not apparent to me here, but I'm prepared to close, Mr. Speaker, seeing no speakers, and I yield myself the balance of my time.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I mean, despite spending hours and days of debate here on Affordable Care Act, repealing it, defunding it, it's being implemented. That's happening. Elections have consequences. As the Speaker of this esteemed body himself has said, it's paraphrase. It's unlikely that we will repeal Obamacare with a fellow named Obama in the White House. That's simply a truism. Yet here we are today discussing something that will go nowhere and does nothing, instead of something that will go somewhere and does something. This bill before us fails to replace our broken immigration system with one that works. If this bill before us today passes, I guarantee you that 1,000 people will continue to cross illegally into the country tomorrow, the next day, and the next day. This bill does not secure our border at all. This bill does not reduce our deficit by over $100 billion. This bill does not reflect our values in our immigration system. This bill does not allow us to look in the mirror at night knowing that we are a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws, and we must reconcile those two. The Senate passed a bipartisan comprehensive immigration bill last June, a bill that holds true to these principles of fiscal responsibility, reducing our deficit, shoring up Social Security, the principle of national security, of finally getting serious about securing our southern border, implementing mandatory workplace authentication to ensure that employers are following the law, the principle of job creation and competitiveness, a system that will make sure that the great companies of tomorrow are based here and that we have access to the talent we need to be great and grow our economy as a country. The Senate Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill would grow our GDP by over 3.3%. This bill will not. This bill will not. And finally, this bill does nothing to address the concerns that have been raised by the Catholic Conference of Bishops, by the Evangelical Immigration Round Table, by faith-based groups in a broad coalition across this country, and by those who value our traditions and our values as Americans. This bill does nothing to reconcile our immigration system with our values. And the Senate immigration bill does. We can take it up now. We can pass it now. The President has expressed a willingness to sign it now. And I encourage my colleagues to vote no and defeat the previous question, to vote no on this restrictive rule and unnecessary bill so that finally we can bring forward the Senate Immigration Reform Bill, pass it, and send it to the President of the United States to get serious about addressing problems the American people, by an overwhelming majority, actually want us to solve. The Senate bipartisan bill would bring people like Javier out of the shadows, reunite Gabriela and her sister with her parents, and provide them with an accelerated 5-year path to earn permanent residence so that they can contribute to make our country even greater. Mr. Speaker, today's debate isn't really about the Affordable Care Act or even health care in general. What's happening is happening. Some people like it, some people don't. It's happening. This debate is purely politics. I ask my friends on the other side of the aisle, why are we not focused on replacing our broken immigration system with one that works? If my colleagues on the other side of the aisle join me on voting no, defeating this rule, and defeating the previous question, perhaps we can finally get to work on the people's business here in the House of Representatives and finally fix our broken immigration system and replace it with one that works for our prosperity, our security, and for job creation for Americans. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Colorado yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
And Mr. Speaker, again, let me remind you why we are here today. We are here today because the President, who signed the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act into law March of 2010, on July 2nd of this year, decided he was not going to enforce a portion of the law unilaterally. The President made the decision, didn't consult with Congress, put it out in a blog post on one of their White House websites on July the 2nd. Then 3 days later, on the Friday before the 4th of July weekend, they came out with a raft of regulations, and buried within that raft of regulations was the fact that, oh, by the way, we're not checking anybody who comes in. It will rely on self-attestation. They were required to do that because by not enforcing the employer mandate that was in their law that they signed, by not enforcing the employer mandate, the data would not be collected, and in fact there was no way to enforce that data. So we simply don't need the data. We'll trust people are going to be honest. If they come in and say they need a subsidy, of course they need a subsidy. We'll give it to them. And yeah, at some point it might even be checked against their IRS records. How are you going to claw that back from someone who doesn't have the money anymore? Because after all, the dollars in the subsidy don't go to the individual, they go to the insurance company. It's not like that individual went and deposited that in a bank account. It went to their insurance company to buy their health insurance. The money's been spent, the policy has been utilized or not, but that water is under the bridge. I didn't ask for this debate. I didn't ask for the President to sign the health care bill into law, but he did. But then I sure didn't ask him to just delay parts of it. If anything is inconvenient to you, Mr. President, just kind of put it away, put it to the side. All kinds of things have fallen off the Affordable Care Act as it's bucked and burped down the road towards implementation. You may remember the debate about pre-existing conditions. What about the federal pre-existing condition program? Anyone who showed up after February 1st of this year to be covered under the federal pre-existing condition program was told, sorry, the window is closed, we're not signing up any more individuals because we're out of money. So they had to wait 11 months until the Elysian fields of the Affordable Care Act spread out before them. But what are they to do for that 11 months? If they've got a diagnosis which is incompatible with life unless they get treatment, but the administration didn't care about that. They simply suspended enrollment in the pre-existing condition program. Well, what about the caps on out-of-pocket expenses that an individual could incur during a year? Under the Affordable Care Act, there were caps signed into law by the President. The caps were excluded because it's kind of inconvenient and we don't want to do that anymore. The small business health exchanges delayed for a year. What else is going to fall off this thing as it lurches towards implementation on January 1st? I don't know. But I do know this. We have an opportunity today to vote on a rule that allows a bill to come to the floor that will require that the Department of Health and Human Services, the Inspector General, assure that those individuals who come and say, hey, I'm eligible for a subsidy, to ensure that they are in fact eligible for that subsidy. We fight all the time in committee with money going out the door at the Department of Health and Human Services, the pay and chase model. It clearly doesn't work. Medicare and Medicaid, inappropriate payments, inefficient expenditures happen all the time. Let's not make that worse. Let's stop paying the crooks. We have an opportunity today to stop paying the crooks. Mr. Speaker, today's rule provides for the consideration of a critical bill to protect taxpayer dollars from the rampant fraud inevitable in an undertaking as massive as the health insurance overhaul that is known as Obamacare. I congratulate my colleague from Tennessee, Ms. Black, for her thoughtful piece of legislation, and for that reason, I'll yield back the balance of my time, move the previous question, encourage my colleagues to vote yes on the rule and yes on the underlying bill.
The gentleman from Texas yields back. The question is on ordering the previous question of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Gentleman from Texas.
May I ask for the yeas and nays on that vote?
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having arisen pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the House will stand in recess subject to the call of the chair.
The House has been debating the rule for a bill which would bar the administration from providing subsidies to help individuals buy insurance under the health care overhaul until the Health and Human Services Secretary confirms a plan to verify those applicants' household income and health insurance status. We expect a vote on the rule when the House comes back sometime around 2 o'clock Eastern or so. Also possible this week, the continuing resolution, temporary funding, keeping the government funded past September 30th. The end of the current fiscal year. The Democratic and Republican leaders in the House and Senate will meet tomorrow to discuss the debt ceiling and also the CR. Washington Post is writing today that House Republican leaders struggled yesterday to win conservatives for a plan that would keep the government running through mid-December and force the Senate to vote on derailing implementation of President Obama's signature health care law. The Post writing that House leaders unveiled the plan to rank-and-file Republicans yesterday but it was met with skepticism from some prominent conservatives and landed with a thud among grassroots architects of the defund Obamacare drive. That's from the Post. Meanwhile, Chad Pergram of Fox News is tweeting this afternoon, still no plans for House Republicans to convene Rules meeting today, so House can consider CR Thursday. Reservations about the CR and possible trouble with the rule. That from Chad Pergram. More details as they become available and live House coverage when they return here on C-SPAN. And until they do return, we're going to bring you part of this morning's Washington Journal, our spotlight on